All right, episode 46. Let's get set up. Let's get set up here a bit for the video. There we go. Looks pretty good. So episode 46. Um, I did not get an episode out last week. If you noticed the gap in your subscription feed. If you didn't notice the gap in your subscription feed, ding, go subscribe. And also pass along to a friend or two that you think might also enjoy this. Leave a comment, subscribe, all that stuff. I don't remember why I didn't get an episode out. I'm trying to think back if there was some reason. In fact, if anything, I had more time last weekend than I've had in the last 2 or 3 months. I'd been spending a lot of time traveling for work, and being away from home most of the week, and then the weekends were just packed with everything that I couldn't do during the week because I was away. But I would still find time to record a podcast and a studio session with the Euro Rack. But I didn't last week. It was the Super Bowl weekend, which in and of itself doesn't mean a whole lot. I don't follow American football, but I did watch the Super Bowl, and I made a post on the Facebook about the Super Bowl that I'm going to start with because it's prompted the subject for today, which is the title. I think is going to be 4 Inspirations. So the New England Patriots were playing in the Super Bowl against some other team. Not Kansas. They beat Kansas earlier. So they were playing some other team. And Tom Brady is their quarterback. Now, I went to school in Maine in the late 80s. And I then even still also wasn't really a football follower. It's not like I used to be a fan and then have tapered off in the following decades. I've never really been a fan, although I've always enjoyed watching TV and drinking some beers and watching something. So I've always enjoyed that. But the New England Patriots back then were not a successful team. And then in the early 2000s, it might have been the year 2000, I had started to reconnect with a friend of mine from Bates from college. I mean, we'd kept in touch through the decade, but it was different back then in terms of keeping in touch. We didn't have the internet. But I remember being in Portland, Maine, visiting when Tom Brady played his first playoff game. And I look fondly back on that because it was a beautiful evening. It was a ton of snow. We were out late. We were tearing up the town like painting it red, whatever the expression. And it occurred to me when I was watching the Super Bowl this year that although I don't have any awareness or insight into the sport itself, there's something about the New England Patriots playing that reminds me of that time and of the time at Bates when we were all young and we were filled with care for each other and what we were trying to figure out. And I have enormous affection for the people we were, 30 years ago, right? Tom Brady hasn't been playing for 30 years, but he has been playing for nearly 20 years, right? An enormous length of time. So that sporting event made me think about those earlier times, and one of the things it made me think about were influences that have stayed with me since then and shape who I am now, what I do, how I do what I do, how I do this podcast. Made me think about what I want to do with podcasting and with music, which I know is a lot for Tom Brady to bear, but he's got big shoulders and he's a strong person and can probably take my emotional projection as well as anything. So I'm going to talk about four influences, and there's really a fifth. I'm going to start with one, and then there are four others, and two of them are about music, and specifically playing piano. What I think about playing the instrument, um, and and then the other two are more about teaching, or um, narrating, or a voice telling a story, or um, talking about things that are important. So four influences, with one to start with. Um, so the first, and this was incredibly important early at school, was the woman who taught me to play piano at Bates, my teacher there, a woman called Natasha Chances, and she engaged with my playing, and I thought what I would say. She taught me an enormous amount about how to listen to music, think about it, think about how I want to play it. Uh, but she taught me first and foremost that the instrument is tactile. You know, I studied um, exercises written by her teacher, Alfred Cortot, and I actually talked about this in a podcast a few months ago. I'll see if I can dig that out and put it in the show notes. The episode number, it was maybe 10 episodes ago. Um, the importance of the physical structure of the hand on the keys, and the idea that you can generate a lovely tone at the piano, which of course you can, but that's not always the focus of teaching. You know, it's not always the focus of playing. Um, and so we practiced pieces very slowly and focused on sort of leaning into the instrument and bearing weight on a finger, and transferring it smoothly, and thinking about the fingering that you use so that the weight can transfer evenly and precisely how you want it to, which may be smoothly and legato, or it may be rapid fire and aggressive, but there's this sort of haptic awareness of the leaning into the piano. And that is sort of this underlying experience that I've always kept. Now I'm an amateur at the piano, and in the best sense of the word. I have some competencies at the instrument. I have a great love for the instrument. I am able to express myself through playing music I've written myself, and also the classics or other music. And I feel like this is this lineage is I do feel a connection from Natasha Chances through her teacher Cortot to this sort of French tradition of musical color, and like I said, this haptic, tactile sensation at the piano. And that's been the case even in the times when I have not played a whole lot, and my I can say things like this now. My 30s, I didn't play a whole lot of music in my 30s. In my early 30s, like 31, 32, really the early part of the decade, I dropped out of the graduate program I was in, so I didn't finish my PhD. Massive career shift, and all of the questions that come along with that about identity and am I a musician, or am I a composer? And it took a long time to get to a place where the question isn't relevant anymore. In some ways, I play the way that I do everything else, which is sort of to the extent that I'm capable of expressing myself or acting as kind of a funnel for insight or amusement or entertainment, and then passing that back out. And that dynamic is very real and very important to me. And I feel very fortunate to have, in the last 5 years or so, really re-engaged with the practice of playing the instrument. And a big part of it was letting go of the idea that it was associated with anything other than this connection to my physical phenomena, my physical sense of playing the instrument. I know I talked about this in that earlier episode, but this was important after I had some surgery that damaged my hearing. I'm deaf on one side. I have weird sort of peripheral weird hearing on the other side. But the tactile sense of the finger on the keys has never gone away, no matter how strange the instrument sounds. And believe me, it sounds strange. I've gotten used to it. But when I first sat down and played the piano after I'd recovered a little bit from this second surgery, it sounded like like a frequency shift and ring modulation all at the same time, plus phantom hearing, plus tinnitus that is really, it's difficult to explain how present that is. But, I could still lift my knee up and feel it underneath the piano and then dig in. And I started then to really re-engage and approach playing the piano from that moment. Not from that moment, that makes it too specific. But I can look back and say that in the last 5 or so years, I have appreciated the fact that I have this connection to a way of thinking about playing the piano. So that's the first. Now I'm going to get 4 influences, right? I'm just going to run through them. Glenn Gould, Thelonius Monk, Karl Haas, and Terrence McKenna. Now those first 3 I was listening to and listening to and appreciating while I was in college. Terrence McKenna was a little bit later, maybe the few years after I graduated. But if I go case by case, again, the first 2 are pianists, Glenn Gould and Thelonius Monk, and the Karl Haas was a radio broadcaster who talked about music. He was in Maine. He came on a Saturday evening. You could listen to Karl Haas, and then it was after Prairie Home Companion. I might be making that up. It might have been on a Sunday morning. But let's say it was a Saturday evening after Prairie Home Companion. Karl Haas would come on. And then Terrence McKenna was a lecturer or a writer, a philosopher, a bard, a thinker, a psychedelic shaman whose art form was best represented in these ad hoc raps about all manner of subjects that over the course of a decade revealed different interests and different focus, starting with this connection to the psychedelic experience and then moving out from there into other big questions about humanity and the imagination and death, psychedelics. So the 4 influences. So the first influence, Glenn Gould, and I'm thinking specifically here about the 1981 recording of the Goldberg Variations, which was the second time he'd recorded those pieces. He began his recording career with a performance of the Goldberg Variations, and then in 1980 recorded them again, and then shortly after that died. And my age then, I think about that now. I listened to that recording in high school, and now I'm the same age he was when he died. But that second performance in particular is is unique and is famous for the idiosyncrasies of the performance, which of course Glenn Gould is famous for his idiosyncratic choices of articulation and tempi. But um, in this recording, he plays the aria impossibly slowly, but still manages to tie it together. So it's a da 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 da. Even the trills and the ornamentation become these sort of heavy, not heavy, these meaningful gestures. And I remember listening in the library at Bates and going into the back of the listening area there with headsets, and that LP it was vinyl. It was back then, of course, and totally zoning out. And so this is one of the things that I learned from that piece, is that there is a state of listening that is close to being asleep. And I don't know if hypnagogic is the right word for it, but I would put this music on and then very soon be not awake, but not asleep either. It was my first experience with this state of awareness that wasn't necessarily tied to the immediate physical body. And the piece is so long and so well as the surface material shifts along, there's always this underlying repeated, very simple chord structure. So I can look back, and I wouldn't have said this at the time. I would have just said that I found it very relaxing or very peaceful to listen to the piece, and I always fell asleep. But looking back, I can say that what I was learning was how to separate my my awareness a little bit from the body and become aware of the imagination, or this other zone that is hypnagogic or liminal. Right? It's a very important experience. Took a long time to be able to even say what vague understanding I have of it now, but that experience of sitting in the back of the library listening to that record is definitely part of that. And the other influence more directly attributed to what I was talking about before about playing the instrument, Gould also thought and talked and worked on the touch of the instrument. So he sat at a very low stool. And if you think of how you usually see pianists kind of leaning in from quite high up, his stool was 6 inches off the ground. So in some ways it looked absurd. He was sitting there, and the lid of the piano would be up about at his chest, and his hands would be this sort of weird angle pulled up. But it was so that he could get the right touch on the piano. And when you hear the recording, there's this undeniable feel of the touch of the instrument. And that's secondary to how it sounds. It's like when you hear those recordings, you are first of all aware of the fact that it is being played in the way that it is being played, and that this is an essential choreography for the experience of the piece. It's not artificial. It's not an imposition of an idiosyncratic artist into the process. It is actually necessary for that to be there so that the piece will emerge in the way that it does and have the kind of impact that it would have on me. The tactile nature of the creation of the music is as important in those Gould recordings as the sound that's produced. And this may be a chicken and the egg question. Is that do you need that tactile connection to create a certain sound, or is the sound created because you have a certain tactile sense? I know what my sense is that the tactile dance of the fingers on the keys is the primary importance. And the sound is a secondary, it's an epiphenomenon of the choreography of the performance. So, Glenn Gould. Right. Now then, at the same time, I was listening to Thelonius Monk, and I don't play jazz, and I never really learned how to, I don't know how to read a chart, really. I'm not an improviser in the sense of being able to improvise. I mean, right, when I compose, I improvise in the sense that I bang around on the piano until I hear something I like, and then I try to do it again and write it down. But the idea of taking a song that's a melody and chords and progression and improvising with other players is something that I've never done. I mean, of course, improvising with the Eurorack, that's improvised as well, right? I have set parameters within the modules that I then allow to unfold and shape a little bit over time. And that is improvisatorial, which is one reason why I've enjoyed working so much with that, because it is a different way of writing. It's a different set of requirements. There's no requirement that the piece that I would perform now, if you said, play me something on the Eurorack, I would. It would be a performance of a piece. I would title it, of course, and I would consider it a piece, but I wouldn't ever be able to do it again. Even if I didn't unplug the cables and restart it, it would still be very different every time. So improvisation, I'm not but I would listen to Thelonius Monk, and I still do now, and he has this amazing, I'm going to use the word heaviness again, but it's not heaviness. Like the way that the sort of this offset chord, like I'm thinking in particular of a type of gesture that he often has, where there's a series of chords that are moving chromatically down in parallels. And there's this sort of heaviness of the beat that isn't just playing ahead of the beat or behind the beat or that kind of language. It's so fleshy. That's what I mean. Not heavy. It's fleshy. Like you can feel the pads of his hands hitting the keys as he's moving down with his chords. And it's absolutely, I think the microphone, I probably just knocked the hell out of the microphone. Probably been doing that for the whole time. Every time I move my hands, the microphone's been shaking. Sorry. So again, Thelonius Monk, like Gould, has this physical presence at the piano, at the touch of the instrument. Totally different in affect, right, between the two, but central to the enjoyment of his performance and his and as a listener, but also I think as a player, I really believe there was just this sort of sense of the hands hitting the keys, and then what the fingers did, and this is going to sound dumb, but what the fingers did is kind of secondary. It's more like, did the hand hit the keys at the right angle and at the right time, and then boom, boom, the fingers. I feel the same way about Messiaen. I know this is going off on a tangent, but the Messiaen piano stuff is it's not about the fingers. It's about just getting the hand, and then whatever squiggle is required on the hand. Is it all at once? Is it left to right and then back and up and down? Just as it hits, the slight difference in the angle of strike generates an arrangement of the fingers. And once you've got that, the Messiaen stuff, I believe, falls into place. Now, I say that not being able to play the big Messiaen piano pieces, but that it's a matter of time, I think, and the striking of the hand on the keys in a particular angle. And then, yeah, of course, there's all kinds of clever dexterity with the fingers that shape that, but there's a central gesture. Uh, and of course, and then Messiaen wrote it down and orchestrated. Monk just plays it, and then it's this carved out sensation of the physicality of the hands on the piano, and then his melodies and his improvisation around those. So you have these two pianists, Glenn Gould and Thelonius Monk, both with this uh, extraordinary heartfelt physical connection to the instrument in a way that isn't there for every musician, every performer. And fair enough, it's not. It's a certain way of approaching the instrument, and it comes with, it probably prevents. It probably prevents you from playing certain types of music. I don't know. There's certainly plenty of types of music I can't play, and it could be because I don't have the dexterity, but it could also be because I just think of music as this sort of thumping away. You know what I mean? Like there are these big gestures, and the details, yeah, they're delicate and nuanced, but there's always a broader physical gesture underneath them. And perhaps in some cases that isn't the case. And if I approached music with this, this fleshy fullness at the keyboard, maybe I'd never be able to play them. I don't know. But maybe I'll try and find out. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Glenn Gould and Thelonius Monk at the keyboard. And take it for what it's worth. I'm certainly not saying anything to take away from different ways of thinking about those two musicians or anyone else. I just for myself, I feel this. Like I say, I think fleshy is the right word for this fleshy accompaniment at the piano. So, and that took a lot longer than I thought. I'm already at half an hour. So I think what I'm going to do is wrap up for today, and then come back and do Terrence McKenna and Karl Haas next week. So this is the first of two parts on the four influences, right? I think that makes sense because with Karl Haas, I really want to talk about how he took a single idea and allowed it to unfold, talking at the piano, which that alone I loved. But then the way that he talked about it. And the same with McKenna is, so for both of them, there's a vocal element that's different from the two pianists. So, and they both teach. McKenna and Karl Haas are both fundamentally teachers. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what it is to speak and to write and to teach. So I'm going to wrap up. I already did my little bit about subscribing. I did that at the top of the hour. So other logistics, you all know about my upcoming concert, April 13th, part of the Kaiser Plays Kaiser series. This concert is going to be music for hurdy-gurdy and electronics. I've been practicing the hurdy-gurdy for two of the pieces. One is my arrangement of some Philip Glass music for hurdy-gurdy and harmonica. That's difficult. That's up in the air whether I'm going to be able to pull that off. So there's that. And then I've also been working with the Coma Electronique field kit, which is a nice portable unit. It's got a lot of capability. And I'm using that as my central arrangement for the electronics that go along with the hurdy-gurdy. I have a couple other pieces feeding into it. As I get closer, I'll do a special video just on that setup. But so keep your eye open for that. Subscribe to the newsletter because I do talk about it there as well. And please leave a comment. I really appreciate when I hear from people, and I totally appreciate everybody who listens. So Thank you, and more next week. Keep your wits about you.